Now, Mr. Burks, I understand that you have a more recent document that you were able to get faxed to the court.
Yes, ma'am.
From your landlord. I'd like to see it.
The courtroom burst into laughter the moment three young men from Sacramento stepped forward and introduced themselves to Judge Judy. At first glance, they looked more like a group of friends arriving for a casual afternoon than participants in a legal battle involving thousands of dollars in debt, a broken lease, an eviction, and a friendship that had completely fallen apart. Their relaxed attitudes, nervous smiles, and lighthearted answers seemed almost out of place in a courtroom where lives, finances, and reputations were often put under a microscope. But what nobody realized, not the audience, not the litigants, and perhaps not even the young men themselves, was that they were about to become the center of a courtroom drama that would expose a chain reaction of bad decisions, broken promises, and financial irresponsibility. As the camera swept across the courtroom, the atmosphere felt deceptively calm. The spectators settled into their seats. Some exchanged curious glances. Others quietly studied the paperwork stacked on the judge's bench. Everything seemed ordinary. Yet beneath that calm surface was a dispute that had been festering for months. A dispute that started with friendship and ended with accusations. A dispute that would force everyone involved to answer one uncomfortable question. When everything falls apart, who should be held responsible? The story began months earlier, inside a Sacramento apartment. What seemed like a simple roommate arrangement quickly evolved into a complicated mess. One brother moved out, another brother moved in. A lease transfer was discussed. Responsibilities were supposedly reassigned. Everyone believed they understood the plan. Everyone assumed someone else would handle the details. And that assumption would eventually cost them thousands of dollars. Standing nearby was the defendant, Lovins. At one point, he and the Burks brothers had considered each other close friends. They shared laughs, they shared trust, they shared an apartment. But somewhere along the way, friendship collided with financial hardship. Jobs were lost, rent payments stopped, communication broke down. And before anyone realized how serious the situation had become, the apartment they once called home was heading toward disaster. What made the case especially fascinating was that nobody seemed willing to accept full responsibility. Every answer came with an explanation. Every explanation came with an excuse. Every excuse pointed towards someone else. The blame bounced around the courtroom like a pinball. One person claimed he had moved out. Another claimed he had lost his job. Another insisted he had intended to pay his share. Yet somehow, despite all the explanations, the debt remained unpaid. Judge Judy listened carefully as the young men spoke. Her expression barely changed. Years of courtroom experience had taught her that the most revealing moments often occurred at the very beginning of a case, long before evidence appeared, long before witnesses testified, long before the final ruling. Sometimes all it took was a simple question. Where do you work? How long have you known each other? When did you move out? Did you actually remove your name from the lease? The questions sounded harmless, almost casual, but each answer created a new crack in the story. And with every passing minute, those cracks began spreading. The audience could sense it. Something wasn't adding up. The more the young men talked, the more confusing the timeline became. A lease transfer that never happened, rent payments that supposedly existed but were never submitted, agreements that everyone remembered differently. Suddenly, what looked like a straightforward eviction dispute became a maze of contradictions. Then came the first major revelation. Despite claiming he shouldn't be responsible for the debt, one of the men had entered into a payment agreement with the apartment complex, a fact that immediately caught Judge Judy's attention. If he truly believed he owed nothing, why agree to make payments? The question hung in the air. Nobody had a convincing answer. The courtroom grew quieter. The smiles began to disappear. And for the first time, the young men seemed to realize that this hearing was not going the way they expected. What happened next would turn an already messy roommate dispute into a devastating lesson about accountability. Hidden documents would surface. Contradictions would be exposed. Excuses would collapse under scrutiny. And Judge Judy would methodically dismantle each argument until the truth stood alone in the center of the courtroom. By the time the confrontation reached its climax, friendships would be shattered, assumptions would be destroyed, and one unforgettable courtroom exchange would leave spectators laughing one moment and stunned the next. Because this wasn't just a story about unpaid rent. It was a story about responsibility, a story about trust, and a story about what happens when young friends believe that avoiding a problem will somehow make it disappear. They were about to discover that reality doesn't work that way, and Judge Judy was about to make sure they never forgot it.